Welcome to Last Letters. I'm your host, Jeremy Locke. Joining us today is Green Beret, retired U.S. Army Captain John Arroyo. John suffered a life-changing event April 2nd, 2014 at the military base Fort Hood in Texas. Welcome, John. How are you doing today?
Hey, Jeremy. Thanks for having me. I'm really excited to be here and really hope that people really get something from it and take away.
Well, that's the whole point and the beauty of it. Fort Hood, Texas, I'm thinking what?
I think when people hear Fort Hood, automatically there's this ominous feeling that just comes over them. I mean, there's been 2 mass shootings there. There was a drowning during a training exercise. And then not long ago about the young female soldier that lost her life. I mean, so there's just event after event after event that is not good. You know, Fort Hood is known as the great place. That's the title or the theme or the label of that base. But for me, it wasn't that good. April 2nd of 2014, I was a newly officer. So I started my career as an enlisted soldier, and then I had an opportunity to transition and become an officer. So I'm a new second lieutenant. Although I'm not new to the Army, it's new in rank. So my first assignment on Fort Hood was to be a platoon leader in a medical company. Along with being a new officer, you get all these new details, right? Like, hey, you're the movement officer. And I mean, there's so many things that in a company that company commanders are required to fulfill. And he can't do them all. So what do? They just hand them out. So one of the additional duties for me was to be the unit movement officer. My day started that I was starting a course that was assigned to the unit movement assignment that I had, and it was building load plans working for the Air Force. I know, Jeremy, that you've spent many, many years in the Air Force. So my job in the Army now as a movement officer was to go get certified to be able to build load plans so that when we deployed and we partnered with the Air Force, we could speak their language and we knew that all of their digital equipment.
Right.
I left my house about, I don't know, I would say 5:30 that day, and I went to PT formation, did PT with my soldiers, and then I went to class, and then class started about 9 o'clock, and it was day 1 of this course. At the end of the day, the instructor said, hey, we're going to let you get out early because we want you to go get your property book put on a CD so that when we finish our final project, you're actually working on your equipment. So he lets us get out about, I don't know, say about 3:30 or so. I drive over to the motor pool where I think I'm going to be able to get the information I need. When I get to the motor pool, couple warrant officers say, no, man, you need to go to the headquarters. You need to go to the S4, the supply. That's where you'll get what you need. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I'm trying to hurry up because it's 4 o'clock in the afternoon on a Wednesday. And I know that 4 o'clock in the afternoon, people are going to get ghosted, meaning they're out of there here in the next few minutes. And if I don't get there in time, they're going to be out. I head up to my unit headquarters, which is on Fort Hood. I worked for 1st Medical Brigade Unit. So I pull in our parking lot. I'm trying to look for a parking spot. Well, they're all taken. So I have to park kind of closer to our brigade, which is like the north end of our parking lot. And I'm talking to my sister at this time too on the phone as I'm driving looking for this parking spot. What we're talking about is that I'm going to take my wife to Cancun. 2011, I took my wife to Cancun. Now it's 2014, April 2nd, and my wife wants to go back. She's had a lot of tragedy in her life just prior to us moving to Fort Hood. It was kind of a way to kind of get her out and just kind of get things off her mind. So anyways, I pull in this parking lot and I tell my sister, hey, I got to let you go. I got to get into my unit before everyone jets out. She's like, okay, hey, I'll talk to you later. So I hang up the phone and I get out of my car and I just turn left, like just walking away from my car. And all of a sudden I hear shots fired. Jeremy, you just said it. You said Green Beret Captain John Arroyo. I know what shots fired sound like. I turned away to walk and I hear shots fired and I just stop in my tracks and I was like, man, that's too real. We are not in Afghanistan. We're not in Iraq. And I'm behind security, right? So when I went to work that morning, somebody checked my ID card and that dude in the front was wearing a badge and a gun and had body armor. I was behind him. So I didn't think I was in danger. Who thinks they're when they're on base, they're in danger? So I stop and I'm looking around and directly in front of me to my 12 o'clock is the unit headquarters. To my 9 o'clock to the left would be 1st Medical Brigade. And then to my 1 o'clock, there's a road that divided our unit headquarters from a transportation unit. When I heard the shots fired, I heard it coming from my 1 o'clock. So I'm looking towards my 1 o'clock. And then a car pulls up in our parking lot right in front of me, about 15 yards away. But I don't think I'm in danger. There's no reason for it because who walks into a Walmart parking lot and thinks all of a sudden they're in danger? Cars are coming and going. So I see the car, I acknowledge it. I see the individual, but I turn my head back once again to where I heard the shots fired. And the next shot I heard ripped through my throat. April 2nd of 2014, what was happening is those shots that I heard was Specialist Ivan Lopez, an E4 soldier, was driving down that road and he was shooting at everybody he saw. And when he pulled in my parking lot, I didn't realize that he was taking a beat on me. So he pulled up a weapon. I turned my head to the right, like at a 45-degree angle, looking towards my 1 o'clock, looking where I was hearing no shots fired. And the next shot I heard was a 45 that ripped through my jugular vein, went through my voice box, and traveled into my right shoulder.
Wait, so it's the guy that pulled up in the car.
The guy that pulled up in the car was doing the mass shooting, and I was victim number 16 at that moment. He shot 19 of us. There was 3 more after me, and then he ended up killing himself. I think I need to tell you the rest before we keep going.
Oh, yeah, I'm on the edge of my seat.
So here's what happened. I don't stick around trying to figure out what he's going to do. I turn and try to get away from him, and I'm trying to get back towards my car. As I think back now, I think I was just trying to find safety. He drives off, and I walk back towards my car. Shot, bleeding out. So let me go back. So I'm shot. I'm kind of stunned for a moment.
You don't fall to the ground?
I don't fall to the ground. I don't. And as a matter of fact, I wasn't really sure if I was shot. What I felt was like a baseball bat hitting me in the chest. I didn't feel pain. I didn't just fall over. I just felt like someone just knocked the wind out of me. And I was like, am I shot? And then just instantly mass amounts of blood just started coming out of my neck. And that's when I turned, tried to get away from him, walk back towards my car. I get to my car and I fall on the ground. And I'm laying on the ground and I'm just begin to start thinking about my wife. I'm thinking about my family.
Does that stuff really go through your mind?
It did. It did for me. When I was on the ground with potentially seconds to live, I wasn't thinking about emails. I wasn't thinking about Facebook. I wasn't thinking about all those things that distract us from really what matters most. What I thought about in that moment is what mattered most. And it was my family. I thought about my wife and who was going to care for her, who was going to raise my children if I died right there on the ground. You know, you've had a great military career. So did I. I went from being an enlisted truck driver. I joined the military because I was just a punk. I needed discipline. So I joined the military. I become a truck driver. And then I become a Green Beret, and then I transitioned and become an Army officer. I had this career, and I was trying to give my wife this life that she really didn't even care about, right? I'm like, honey, hold on. Just wait. I'm going to give you the yacht. I'm going to give you everything your heart desires. But really, all your family ever really wants is you. What I realize now is the people that I thought about at the moment when I only had seconds to live were the ones that I sacrificed the most, Jeremy. I sacrificed what mattered most. And when I only had seconds lived, it was who mattered most were the only people that came to mind. So here I am, I'm freaking out. I'm thinking about my wife, but I just said, is this where it ends? And then right in that moment, I hear an audible voice. But Jeremy, the voice didn't come from outside. It came from inside of me. Here's what the voice said. John, get up or your wife is going to die. Jeremy, I'm the one shot. Why would I hear get up or my wife is going to die when I'm the one shot? So I just shrug it off because I think I'm talking to myself at this time. And I go back to freaking out and asking God what happens to my family. And then I hear it again, but this time more stern. John, get up or your wife is going to die. I talked about that Cancun trip just prior to us getting to Fort Hood when I finished officer school. Now it's April, but just prior in September, my mother-in-law died of an aneurysm. 9 days later, my father-in-law dies of cancer. 2 years before that, my brother-in-law dies in a hunting accident, dies in my father-in-law's arms. So my wife had lost her brother, her mother, her father. We were on Fort Bragg for 15 years. Now we're on Fort Hood for 5 months. And all of our structure, all of our family, all of our friends, we're all in North Carolina. Here I am on the ground bleeding out. What I believe today now was a divine voice. God was audibly speaking to me. And what he was saying is if you don't get up off the ground, the bullet that went to your throat will kill you and your wife because your wife is going to take her life.
I mean, that's profound. I mean, when you heard that, then what's running through your mind? Is it seconds that this happens, or is it like you're down for a minute or two and this is happening?
I think it was prolonged. I think it was a longer period of time than I think, but it could have happened in 30 seconds. I don't know. In this moment, when I'm hearing this voice, my emotions are, how can I get up? I'm dying.
Did you feel like you were dying? I mean, I don't know what dying feels like.
And so. You know what? I don't either. And I hope I don't have to experience again, but I would just say that I felt weak at that moment. I felt like I was weak, but I just knew I knew I had to try to get up. When I became a Green Beret, I went to selection. Come to selection just to see if you have what it takes, and then we'll put you into our training course. I made it all the way through my first attempt, and then they told me, hey, you're going to have to come back. I went back. I got selected, became a Green Beret the second time. So when I'm on the ground, I think I couldn't quit on my family. I had to at least try to move. So when I heard this voice say, John, get up or your wife is going to die, no one picked me up. I had a decision. It was easier, Jeremy. It was easier for me to stay on the ground and die that day, right? What would they have told my wife? Oh, Angel, that was a fatal shot. John never had a chance. That 45 ripped through his throat and he was out. But I would have knew. And if I would have stepped in front of God, he would have said, I gave you a choice. Now look what's going to happen to your family because you didn't make the decision to live. So I'm on the ground. I hear get up. I start moving. I get up and I go to grab my throat with my right arm, but it doesn't move. At the moment, I just assumed that my arm broke when I fell on the ground. And I look like Terminator. If anyone's ever seen a Terminator movie, like my right arm's dangling, it's hanging, and I'm bleeding. I grab my throat with my left arm, and I turn and I start walking. I'm trying to go back to my organization, which is 61st. And so I know that I'll find people there. I'll find help. So I move. And as I'm walking towards 61st, I see a soldier from a distance. And now he's walking towards 1st Medical Brigade. And so I'm walking towards him because he's the first person I've seen, and I'm trying to get to this guy, and I'm stumbling. I'm not moving real fast. But as he gets closer to me, I just begin to slow down because something about his demeanor is not right. And the guy's like very like hyper vigilant. His head is on a swivel, like really quick, and he's moving left and right. And then I stop. I just stop in my tracks, and he stops right in front of 1st Medical Brigade doors. And now we're only 10 feet apart, and I'm standing in front of the guy that just shot me. He shot me from his car, drove off, got out of his car looking for more people to shoot. When he's walking, I'm walking. I just see a soldier in a uniform. I don't think that I'm in danger. I'm thinking I'm going to get help. He stops in front of me. It's the guy that just shot me. So now here I am face to face with the shooter once again, and he's got a beat on me. He doesn't draw a weapon or anything, but I'm standing and I'm just frozen because I know I can't go anywhere. And he's looking at me, and then he looks to the left and looks to the right with his head on a swivel. And Jeremy, all I can say is because I made a decision to get up and to obey that voice, the God of heaven's armies did another miracle, and he blinded the guy from seeing me. He turned, walked away from me, walked into the brigade, shot 3 more people, walked out the back and shot himself. I don't stick around trying to figure out what's going to happen. As I turn to my right, I start moving like towards my 1 o'clock again, and I could hear him shooting. I hear these soldiers yell to me, "Soldier, are you okay?" They said when I was walking, what alerted them that I was injured is that it looked like I had a red scarf flapping in the wind. It was the blood squirting out of my neck. I stop and I do a 90-degree turn. They're across the parking lot from me, and I yell to them. It probably wasn't loud, but I was able to yell loud enough. And I said, "No, I've been shot. There's a shooter." And it probably sounded like this. And they yelled at me. They tell me to get down. They run to me. About 5 guys run to me. They get me on the ground. 1 soldier runs back in the direction of the brigade, gets his truck. So he's putting himself in danger. He gets his truck. They put me in the back of a truck. As we're going over towards the hospital, I just remember just shutting my eyes and just thinking, just breathe, just keep breathing, just keep breathing. And one of the soldiers later told me, he said, "I told you, sir, don't speak, because every time you tried to speak, you just spilled more blood." He said, "I just told you to squeeze my hand." He said, "But as we got closer, your squeeze was getting less and less." You've been in the military. What happens when someone has an open wound? What do we want to do? We want to put pressure.
Pressure, yeah.
So where were they putting pressure?
On your neck.
On my throat.
In your arteries, probably.
That's right. So they're putting pressure on my throat, which means I can't breathe, even more so from what just happened to me. So I kept slapping their hand out of the way because I'm like, you guys are going to kill me. That's a joke. So we got.
It's hard to kind of laugh in this situation. You're telling me like I'm on pins and needles. Like
they get me to the hospital. I have an encounter with this EMT that I didn't realize until later. I mean, there's so much about this story that I'm still learning, right? People that were involved, that were there. I get an email from a guy and he says, "Hey, I was there. I did something that you never find in a medical book." And I said, "What's that?" "When you came in, you had this look of horror over your face and you were just like fear." And he said, "I just stuck my fingers in your throat, just trying to stop the bleeding." He said, "And I told you that you were going to be okay. And as soon as I said that to you, like this peace came over you." And he said, "Then we got you inside. One of the doctors put a tube in your throat. And he said, you had guppy breathing at that time.
What's that?
Same question I asked. What's guppy breathing? He said, that's the breathing you have right before you expire.
Really?
Yeah. Now it's mass casualty situation. Fort Hood is now alerted that there's people being shot. There's 19 of us shot, and all the doctors are now rushing from wherever the location is on the hospital to the ER because now patients are starting to come in. So the nurses are running with me towards the elevator to get me in the OR, to get me into surgery right away. And as soon as they get me to the elevator doors open and 2 doctors come running towards the ER. They were the ear, nose, and throat surgeons. Everything I needed was exactly where it needed to be when I made a decision to get up. Even though it looked like chaos was all around me, even though there was breaking news, Fort Hood shooting, national and international incident, and people were saying, how could this be happening again? Because in 2009, there was a mass shooting where one soldier, Hassan, had shot 30 people. And now here we are 5 years later, another mass shooting, and people were wondering, how could this be happening? When I obeyed the voice, which I believe today is God, when God spoke to me and told me to get up, when I obeyed him, he put everything in line for me. And although death was around me and chaos and fear, there was miracles happening all around me. And so the elevator doors open and the exact doctors I need are coming out, and they're the ear, nose, and throat surgeons. So they didn't have to go anywhere. They had a throat patient right in front of them. So they started caring for me right away. They just turned around, got back in the elevator with me. We went straight up to the OR. And I remember asking one of the docs later, I said, Doc, did I die? Kind of like the question you asked earlier. I said, Doc, did I die? Because I don't remember a near-death experience. I don't remember the white light. And he said, John, you didn't die. And he said, I know that because I replaced every bit of the blood in your body. Your heart just kept pumping, and I had to keep replacing the blood in your body. And I was like, wow. So they stabilize me and they get me to Scott and White, which is a level 1 trauma center. Now they got to alert my wife. Here's my wife, 4:00 in the afternoon. She's at home and my company commander calls her. He says, Angel, have you heard from John? Because every commander is now getting accountability of all their soldiers and civilians. And she says, no, I haven't heard from him. But he typically gets home about 6. When he gets here, I'll tell him to call you. He doesn't alert her. He doesn't tell her anything.
Does he know?
He doesn't know that I'm shot.
Okay.
What he's doing, he's trying to get accountability. I'm unaccounted for. A few minutes later, Nikki Starkey calls. When my wife and I walked into a church in 2009 in Fayetteville, North Carolina, we walked into her dad's church. Her dad is Pastor Dan Stanley. When I became an officer and got my orders to go to Fort Hood, her husband joined the military and his first duty station would be Fort Hood. So we get to Texas just weeks apart. So the pastor's daughter was probably the only lifeline my wife had during that time. She's the one that calls my wife and says, Angel, did you know that there's a shooting on Fort Hood? And as a matter of fact, the shooting is actually where John worked. Now my wife is freaking out because the commander just called trying to look for me. Nikki's on the phone saying, Angel, there's a shooting. So now my wife's freaking out. She turns on the news. And so Nikki tells my wife, well, Angel, you know that John's probably, helping people. So he'll call soon. Call me when he calls you. I don't know how much time transpired. My wife says 30 minutes, but I think she lost track of time. All of a sudden, my commander starts walking towards the door. He doesn't call her. Now he's walking towards the door. He's on my property.
We all know what that means.
That's right. So my wife is looking. She's sitting in our living room. She's watching the news. She's freaking out. She's trying to get a hold of me. I'm not responding. And now my commander's coming towards the door with his wife. He gets up to the door and we have a storm door, a glass door. She can look out and he could see in. She looks at him and he's knocking on the door, but she doesn't move. And she's shaking her head no, because she doesn't want the answer that he's coming to deliver. She's assuming that he's coming to say, hey, your husband's dead. I'm here to tell you. He's knocking on the door. She's shaking her head no, I'm not answering the door. If I don't answer the door, I can't get what you're here to give me. And then he starts saying, Angel, just answer the door. John's alive, but we have to go now to the hospital. She finally answers the door. He gets her to Scott and White Hospital in Temple, Texas. And there my wife sees me for the first time. And she said, your head was so swollen, your tongue wouldn't even fit back in your mouth. What everybody saw that day, Jeremy, was death. Everybody saw death. And even one of the guys called his wife after and he said, honey, I'm okay, but the guy we just got to the hospital, he's probably dead by now. The next day's Thursday. I come out of my second surgery and they tell my wife, he'll be in a medically induced coma until Saturday. My wife says, okay. She walks away from the doctors, walks up to me, grabs my hand, and I wake up right on the spot. And I began trying to talk to my wife and tell her that I got up for her. I'm here right now because I made the decision to get up. What if people that are on the verge of suicide actually knew what would happen to their family the moment they made that decision?
The outcome, the pain.
That's right. So here I am on the ground, and I already know what's going to happen if I don't get up off the ground because I heard it. Your wife will die. So what happens to my children when their uncle's gone, their grandma's gone, their grandfather's gone, their dad's gone, and then mom takes her life? The statistics of children taking their lives after their parents is astronomical. It goes up. It's pretty high.
Have you talked to your wife? Have you ever asked her, like, would she be at that low? Like, would she think that way if you didn't get up?
Yes. And she was already, my wife was already a 2-time suicide survivor previously. From when I was deploying, as a Green Beret, I was going back and forth in 2004, 2005, 2007. So during that span, which is why I mentioned earlier in 2009, we walked into a church, we were heavy drinkers back in the day. I didn't beat on my family, but I came home from deployments and I was angry. I didn't have to touch my family. I just cut them down with my tongue. And my wife felt like she was in the middle of me and my children, and she was just trying to escape the pain. The 2 times she attempted suicide, it was under the influence of alcohol, and she was just trying to end it. So now we fast forward, and to answer your question, she had lost her parents. Her dad was her everything, right? That he was her hero. Her and her parents had a unique relationship because when she was young, she was a daddy's girl, but her mom saw her as competition for her father's heart. Her mom saw her own daughter as competition for her husband's heart. And so what did my father-in-law have to do? He had to keep his distance from my wife when she was a kid in order to protect her. So my wife always wanted this love, always wanted this daddy's love, and now daddy's gone. And she's just utterly broken. She was already feeling the loss of her dad and her mom, which is why I believe God said, get up. My wife was bleeding from the inside. We transitioned from Fort Bragg to Fort Hood, and I was dragging a wounded patient. The only difference is, like a lot of your listeners, their scars and their wounds on the inside. Mine's are on the outside. It's easy to see my wounds. But those people that are inside and they're internally bleeding like my wife was, they could take their life and no one would even know they're wounded.
Let's jump back, because I think what you said, here you are coming home from deployments and you got this family, but the way you used your tongue, the words, is what was really devastating. Can you talk to me about that?
I joined the military in 1998 because I was a meth addict.
Get out of here, really?
Yeah, I was a meth addict. That's the whole reason why I joined the military. I was sleeping on my sister's couch and she was pouring water on me, because I would stay up all night and sleep all day. And so
Where'd you grow up?
In Los Angeles, California. The city of Whittier is where I grew up, in between Anaheim and Los Angeles. So I got into gangs, and here's why, though.
I was just going to ask, were you like gangbanger kind of?
Yeah, I got into that because my dad died when I was 5 years old of cirrhosis of the liver. His uncles thought it was cute to give him alcohol when he was a kid, so they could be amused while they were drinking. My father becomes an alcoholic, and at 34 years old, he dies. Now I don't have an identity. My identity of a man, of what I should become, a lot of times a lot of guys get that from their fathers. Well, when you don't have a father, what happens? You begin to look for your identity elsewhere. You don't have that father figure, and I didn't. So what I did is the influences outside my home became greater than the influences inside my home, because the women in my home, my grandmother, my mother, good women, my grandmother, a very godly woman, wasn't strong enough for me. The influences outside were stronger. I got jumped into a gang at 7th grade. I went from skateboarding, Tony Hawk, riding skateboards, doing all that stuff, late 80s. And then all of a sudden, NWA and F the Police came out, and Snoop Dogg and the Chronic. All of a sudden, there was like a shift, and it was just like the culture changed, and it was all about gangs. The girls thought the gangs were cool. I thought the girls were cool, so I followed the girls and the gangs, and got jumped into a gang at 7th grade. By 9th grade, I'm a teenage father. So when I'm a freshman in high school, I became a father. By 9th grade, I get into methamphetamines, and I didn't graduate junior high. I was just passed along. I wanted to be the funny guy. They would kick me out of class and then allow me to come back in after the teacher taught the lesson. So I didn't graduate junior high. They just passed me along. High school, the teacher's assistant gave me the answers to the test. That's how I graduated high school. I cheated to get through high school. And so I get into methamphetamines after high school, and my life is just going down real quick. I'm giving my son the same thing that I had, nothing. When you're someone that's into addictions, the only person that you're lying to is yourself, because everybody else sees through the addiction. And so when I was on meth, my sister saw right through it. My family saw right through it. I could manipulate my mom, but I couldn't manipulate my sister. My sister had me live with her. I was living with her and she said, hey, you're not going to sleep on my couch all day. You're going to have to go do something. She said, as a matter of fact, you need to get out of here. You're going to be a loser the rest of your life. And I said, well, what am I going to do? She said, you need to join the military. I said, the military is not for me. I slept on her couch a couple more days till after 12 noon. She started pouring water on me. I was waterboarding me on her couch, man. I go to see this recruiter and he says, well, you got to take this ASVAB. I take the ASVAB and I fail it. So you got to score a 30 to get into the military, like just basic 30. I score a 29. Didn't graduate junior high, never cross an academic stage. Now I failed the ASVAB. I feel like a failure. I feel like a loser. I don't have no daddy. I don't have no identity. I'm on drugs. My whole life is falling apart. And I go back to the recruiter 6 months later and I take the test. I score a 31, bro. I score a 31 on a test. You needed a 30. I mean, I just needed discipline. A lot of the men in my family were truck drivers. So I just said, look, love to be an Army truck driver so that I could just come home with some skill and start driving truck.
What gang were you in?
It was called Cantarranas, which means singing frogs.
So you go from this gang, then you go into Matthews. I wasn't around that culture or that part growing up. I mean, that's some nasty stuff and highly addictive. And I mean, how long were you using that?
High school in 96, and then I joined the military in 98. So I would say probably about 2 years, like for about a 2-year span. And here's the thing, I often tell people, how many of you been wounded by people you've trusted? Right now, there's a whole bunch of high school kids that someone's going to introduce them to. And I'm not just saying high school kids, but I use them as an example because that's where I was when I got introduced. People that love them are the ones that introduce them to things that they may never recover from. I still have a friend, and I hope he's not there anymore, but I have a friend that last I knew was still sleeping in his parents' garage because somebody that loved him said, hey, try this. And that's how it was for me. My cousin and I, we were bad examples for each other, but I tried something that he was doing. He's someone that loved me. He wasn't trying to hurt me, but sometimes people were introduced to things by people that love them. And so you get wounded, and there's some people that have never recovered from something like that. It was going into the military that actually broke it.
That's why I was asking. I was working construction, kind of failed out of college, smoking a little weed here or there, but I looked around and I don't want to do this for the rest of my life, and I need a good trade. So for me, a little bit different, but something snapped in me when I looked around and said, I don't want to do this for the rest of my life. And I'm just curious, how did you sit there from gang banging to smoking drugs to going, you know what? The water's being poured on me. I need to do something.
There's a song by Celine Dion called Because You Loved Me. And I tell my sister, because you loved me and didn't give up on me, she was actually the boot in my butt that moved me. So I didn't know what was best for me. So like you had that epiphany. You looked around and looked at your surroundings and said, this ain't for me. There's something greater for me. I didn't have that epiphany. Someone else had it for me and said, I don't want you to end up like this. You need to go do something. And she pushed me. I also say this, I had a 4-foot grandmama that was praying. I'm going to jump into a quick story. My grandmother was a prayer warrior. She was a woman of faith. She never quoted the Bible at us, never did anything, but she was a woman of faith and a woman of prayer. I believe I'm the evidence of her prayers. In 2004, when I first went into Afghanistan as a Green Beret, my grandmother gave me a little bottle of anointing oil. Back then, I didn't know anything about the Bible. I just knew grandma had faith. And she gave me this bottle of the anointing oil. And she said, when you go to war, I want you to pray and put this on everything and everyone. And I want you to pray and ask Jesus to be with you. And I said, okay, here I am, a Green Beret in Afghanistan. I'm on my first deployment. And we're getting ready to go out of the wire, right? We're getting ready to go do patrols or go chase down the bad guys. And I had every weapon system known to man. Every weapon system. Grenade launchers, you name it. I can call an aircraft. We could do it all. But before I'd go anywhere, I would pull out grandma's bottle of anointing oil and I would pray and I would put it on every vehicle. One day, one of my teammates comes up to me. He's an engineer on the team. And he says, hey, man, I appreciate what you're doing and praying for us. He said, would you stop? Because no one's shooting at us. And I was like, what? And he's like, well, we're a bunch of Green Berets, man. We want to get it on. And like you hear stories about some of the other teams that were, man, I mean, like going at it with the Taliban, and we weren't. One of the communication sergeants says, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. The next deployment, we return back to Bagram. We're getting all our gear, and we're told, expect to get blown up, expect to get shot. expect to take casualties. So you know what I did, Jeremy? I pulled out the weapon of choice. See, he wasn't the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob yet. He was still for me the God of grandma. So I pulled out this bottle of anointing oil and I go to the vehicles and I begin to pray over the vehicles, asking Jesus to be with us. And then this medic walks up to that guy that told me not to pray and he says, "Hey man, what's he doing?" And he says, "Just let him go, bro. Just let him go."
Do you remember what you would say?
What I would say when I would pray?
Yeah. When you'd bless the vehicles, bless everybody.
I do. And I didn't have anything formulated. I just said what grandma told me to say. Grandma said, "Plead the blood of Jesus on everything and everyone." And so I would take this bottle of anointing oil and I would go to 50 cal machine guns and I would go to Up Armor Humvees that are ours. And I would say, "Jesus, I ask you to protect us." And for 3 deployments, Afghanistan, Iraq, we lost not one guy. We lost not one guy. Now going back to that kid, that 4-foot woman, she was praying for me. I'm the evidence of those prayers. And then someone was pushing me, my sister. So I didn't have the epiphany. I didn't have the ability within myself to say, I need help. I need to grow up. I need a better life. Someone had to have it for me. And I believe that grandma was praying and my sister was the action to my grandmother's prayers. I didn't think the military was a career. You know, there's a lot of people that have a military history like yourself, like have fathers, you know, have a lineage. I didn't. It was for me, go to war, go to jail. I use that analogy. I wasn't on the verge of going to jail, but I used that because that's where my life was headed. It was either I was going to go to the military, receive some discipline, change my life, or my life was going to go to hell in a handbasket, like quickly. And it was going down real quick. And so I didn't see myself as doing anything great. Again, I had this failure mentality. I had failed junior high, failed high school.
You kind of feel like you just, whatever I could do to get by.
That's it. I just needed a job and some discipline. I needed a skill. I ended up at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. It's my first duty station. And I'll tell you a quick story how I got there. After basic training, you go to AIT, Advanced Individual Training. So truck driver school. For me, it was Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri. The class right before us, when they graduated, everybody went to Korea. So now I'm looking at this. I'm like, there's no way I'm going to Korea. So the drill sergeant walks in one day and he says, "Hey, who wants to go airborne? Because if you go airborne, you're going to get stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina." And I was like, this guy is not going to Korea. I may not know geography because I didn't think I was a smart guy, but I knew that North Carolina was somewhere in the lower 48s on the right-hand side. But if you asked me back then, I probably couldn't point it out for you. I tell the drill sergeant I want to go to airborne school so I can go to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and not Korea. We get to the end of the course. Everybody starts getting their orders of where they're going to get assigned. And I'm laughing, right? Because I'm like, you guys are going to Korea. You want to know where they went? Hawaii. Everybody got stationed in Hawaii. And I'm like, man, don't ever volunteer for anything in the military. And I went and jumped out of airplanes, ended up on Fort Bragg, North Carolina, 1998. And then I saw these Army Rangers in Green Berets. And I was like, those dudes are cool. What did I say earlier? When you don't know who you are, you're trying to create this identity. And so I wanted to be cool. I wanted to be a Green Beret. I wanted to be the guy that everybody thought were cool. That's why I joined the gangs, because the girls thought the gangs were cool.
It's funny that you say that and speak about gangs. And I literally relate some of our military across all services. Like you go in there, it is kind of gang mentality. You got these guys over here, it might be the Green Berets, that's a good gang. Or you got, Navy SEALs over here, or airborne pilots, whatever. It kind of is that mentality.
It can be. But for me at that time, it was really identity. I was looking for that identity. And I wanted people to say that I was cool. As a Green Beret, I wanted to be the guy that everybody knew was behind enemy lines 6 months, crawling on the ground, eating snakes, doing that Green Beret stuff. So I started telling everybody how I was going to be a Green Beret. I had no plans on becoming a Green Beret. I just wanted to tell people I was going to become a Green Beret. One day, a guy walks up to me at work and says, "Dude, go try out to be a Green Beret or shut your mouth."
Nice.
And I'm like, okay, well, I'm not going to shut my mouth. So I submitted a packet to become an Army Green Beret. I started on September 10th, 2001. September 11th, 2001, what happens? Terrorist attack, United States. I'm in Green Beret selection on September 11th, which was day 2 of selection. So they pull us in a classroom and they say, "Hey, we're now a nation at war." And we said, "No, we're not. It's part of the scenario." And they say, "No, we're now a nation at war." So everybody's trying to leave, go back to their units, because they assume that rapid deployment, everyone's going to be deploying. Nobody wants to be in some Green Beret training. They're not going to be Green Berets for like 2 years. The colonel talks to us and says, "Hey, if you want to be in the right place at the right time, here you are." You want to be a part of what this war? Stay put. So we all stay put. I get all the way to the end, 24 days. I don't know how I made it. I just wasn't going to quit. And I'm standing in front of the colonel, and he says, "I'm sorry, you didn't make it." And I said, "What, sir?" And he said, I'm afraid that academically, you're not going to make it through our training course. Here we go again. I'm this failure, right? Junior high, high school, ASVAB. Now I'm in Green Beret training, and they say, "You're not going to make it." I go back a year later, and I get selected, and then I end up becoming an Army Green Beret, and I signed in the 3rd Special Forces Group. 1 June 2004. When I showed up on Fort Bragg, North Carolina, in the 82nd Airborne Division, we were told that we were the most physically fit alcoholics. And we wore that like a badge back then. So I wasn't no longer this meth addict. What I did is I just transitioned that addiction from methamphetamines into a legal addiction, which was alcoholism. And I would drink and run, and I was 20 years old, and I can do all that back then. I just transitioned addictions. That's what my wife was dealing with as I began to deploy. So I become an Army Green Beret. I meet my wife during that time. She goes with me through the whole process. 1 June 2004, I sign into 3rd Special Forces Group. I'm married. My sergeant major tells me, who is the senior enlisted advisor, and he says, "Hey, we're on our way to Afghanistan. You got 15 days to get your family in order, and you'll meet us there." And I'm like, okay. And then I end up doing 3 deployments. And so during that time, going and coming, drinking, I was coming back angry. My wife said, when you would leave and you would come back a different person. I didn't beat on my family, but I would cut them down with my tongue. My wife had to walk the line, and she had to do what I asked her to do. The kids, same thing. They had to do what I asked them to do. And then I took a second job. I was working in battalion staff. I took a second job. My wife was a nurse, 7A to 7P, doing a lot of drinking during this time. I take the second job. My kids are about 13 years old. What happens to a household when parents ain't home? They're working all day. No one's at the house, and kids are having to raise themselves. Well, if there's not influences inside the home, then they're going to find influences outside the home, like what I did.
I was just going to say, kind of like what
That's
you
right.
did.
Yeah. And the same thing. And when dad is home and it's all about barbecues and beers, East LA style, then that's what my kids grew up in. That was their environment. See, what parents don't understand is that you're going to impart something to your kids, good or bad. A lot of times people think, oh, my kids don't know what I'm doing. Oh, they're too young. That's a lie. My kids knew exactly what I was doing, although we weren't fighting. But my buddies, my Green Beret buddies, were coming over every weekend. We were barbecues and beers. My kids grew up in that environment. So when there was no one at home, that's what they started doing. And you know what I did? I blamed them. That's the bottom line. I blamed my kids. I blamed them for them getting on trouble when it was really my fault. I was an absent father. And I blamed my wife. And during that time, because of the person I was and the anger and the way I would cut them down with my tongue, that's when my wife attempted suicide twice. So I know that you had asked me earlier, how did you know that your wife would have probably taken her life? Well, she had already tried it twice. When I heard that voice say, if you don't get up, she's going to lose all hope, she was already broken inside. So I can't say for sure, but I believe that would have been the last straw for her.
What are your conversations with your wife now? Going through this, cutting down with the tongue, the suicide attempts, now you being shot in the throat. Take me through your relationship with her now.
What we do now is we look back at that time frame of where we've come from, and we're amazed. Just like I look back at my life and I'm like, wow, look where I've come from, gangs, drugs, And so we look back at where we once come from, and we're just like, wow, I can't believe we made it. We didn't just only make it, we made it together.
Is it okay to look back?
I believe it is. I wrote this book called Attacked at Home. Initially when I put in there about the gangs and everything, and my sister, she said, don't put that in there. You're this Army officer now. You're a decorated Army officer. You don't want people to know that part of your life. And I'm like, no, but I do. Because guess what? There's other John Arroyos out there right now in high school, in junior high, and they need to know they don't have to take those influences. They don't have to do this. And I look back at my life, at where God brought me, those answered prayers, what he did for me in my life. And I look back as a testimony. Those are testimonies. For me, it's looking back and remembering where we once were and where we are today is a testimony of where our marriage was, where our family was, and where we are today.
What if I look back and I'm still not happy with where I'm at today?
You have to start taking an inventory of where you're at today and who you surround yourself with. Because if nothing's changed, if you look back, you weren't happy then and you're not happy now, what's the common denominator? So for me, back in the day, alcohol was the common denominator. And then hanging out with my buddies, they were also into drinking. One of my friends, and he may hear this, good Green Beret friend of mine, I love this guy to this day. And he had told me, he said, when you left in 2009, when you kind of transitioned out of the drinking, he said, I figured it was going to be a phase. I figured you'll be back. When I started stepping out of the drinking and when I knew it was a problem, I began to cut relationships out also, or I began to redefine those relationships. So I knew that if I went to my friend's house, it would be a knuckle dang, drag out, vodka all night till everybody was on the floor till the next morning.
Typical military party, right?
That's right. But if I said, hey, let's meet for dinner, then I can control the situation. What I would say is if you can look back and nothing's really changed, then you need to stop and take an inventory and find out what was a part of your life then and what's a part of your life now. You need to take an inventory of your relationships, of who you allow in your life, who you allow to speak in your life. And if you're a person of faith, that was my anchor point. I'm here today because I hung on to that faith. And even though grandma was praying for me and I didn't have that faith until later in life, I look back now and see that it was always a part of my life because someone was praying for me and now I actively am engaged in it. And for me, I stop, take an inventory and then say, where am I at with God?
You talk about influences like your grandmother and your relationship with your family, but there's a pivotal one with your sister. Again, being that one who's pouring water. I love that because my dad used to pour water on me. Get up, it's a work day. She had belief or saw something in you. Can you tell me about your relationship with your sister?
My mom's going to hear this. Mom, this is not against you, but my sister was like my mother. I think because we lost our dad at a young age, she stepped in to help my mom. My mom would work. And so she stepped in to help raise us. Even though my grandmother was there, my sister almost became like my mother. And that's what happens in those families where both parents are working. Usually the oldest sibling will have to become almost like a caretaker. And my sister became like a caretaker for me. She essentially became my mother. In those seasons when I was on the ground, when I was sleeping on the couch, when I was addicted to drugs, she actually had me come live with her so that she can observe what I was doing and that she can call me out on it. And then she wanted to help me. And so I say now, she's the love of my life, man. My sister and I today have the best relationship. She's my greatest cheerleader. I was gifted a mortgage-free home by Operation Finally Home, and my sister was there, and she walked in the house, and it was a fully furnished home. And I stood in that home, and I looked at her, and I said, because you love me enough to push me off the couch, I now have this. Because if you didn't do what you did, if you didn't love me enough to push me, see, a lot of times people think that loving people is to let them live their own lives. I've heard this often. My kids used to tell me this. Let me make my own mistakes, and then I'll and then I'll learn from them. Why? My sister didn't want me to make those mistakes. Was she going to let me stay in that moment of drug addiction? She didn't. And so when this young kid was addicted to drugs, someone pushed in enough to say, get up. Kind of like what happened when I was shot. I heard get up, and my sister was actually the first one to tell me to get up.
When I asked you to write your last letter, what ran through your mind?
The same thing that went through my thought when I was on the ground. I only had seconds to live. I wasn't speaking to the world. I wasn't speaking to, let me tell you about that time I took you on that vacation. Let me tell you about that car that I bought you. All the materialism and everything else. So what I did is I focused on what mattered most, and it was my family.
Well, I'd be honored if you'd read your last letter for us.
Well, Jeremy, this is my last letter. Thank you, Jesus, for my second chance at life. I tried my best not to squander the gift I received. I know millions never had a second chance at life, and billions only receive one opportunity. I tried not to waste it by focusing on meaningless pursuits of material items and self-promotion and things that would feed my ego. I did my best to share my second chance with the world after being shot on April 2nd of 2014. My motive was no longer, how can I store up treasures for me and my family, but how can I share life and hope with a hurting world? My mission was a Green Beret, was to free the oppressed. I continued that mission after I got up off the ground, but thankfully, God, you revealed that I needed to slow down and heal. Additionally, Angel had wounds internally that no one could see. She was suffering emotionally after losing both her brother and her parents, and you saved us in more ways than just our physical condition. We are now in a better place as a family, and I can leave my family tomorrow with peace in my heart. I have run my race, and I believe that I'm finishing well. At times, I felt like it was a sprint, but I've tried slowing down to enjoy the journey. I can walk into heaven with peace and joy because I'm leaving a legacy that I'm proud of. God, your word says a wise man leaves an inheritance for his children and his grandchildren. I'm leaving my family an inheritance that is better than silver or gold, a relationship with you. There will not be tears of sorrow tomorrow. There will only be tears of joy because it's not goodbye, only see you later. To my wife, Angel, and children, Tia, Mason, and Junior, and grandchildren, Maddie, Lily, and Jason, I love you. You were all worth getting up for as my life poured out after being shot. It was easier to stay on the ground that day. You need to hear this. I got up for you. You were the only thing on my mind. I had to fight for us. We are not a family of quitters. I need you to know that I'm proud of you and pleased with each of you. Each of you has brought joy to my heart. You are the apple of my eye. Angel, you're the love of my life, and I'm honored that you chose to share your life with me and your heart. I cannot explain with words the joy and emotions I have knowing your face will be the last that I see as I'm staring into the eyes of Jesus. It is almost divine to go from the presence of an angel into heaven. Together, we created a beautiful family and a legacy that will contribute to the betterment of humanity. I kept my promise I made to your father before he passed that I would take care of you. Babe, the truth is, you have taken care of me. I know that I ran my mouth at times with the D word. I was never serious. I simply wanted us to be better and for you to fight for us. We did it together. I want you happy your entire life, not just the time we have had together. If you choose, I give you the blessing to remarry. Find a good Christian man that will love you and the kids. Someone that will become your companion because your life is far from over. Tia, Daddy's baby girl. I love watching you grow up. You were destined to be great. I saw it in you. You have always been determined to succeed at whatever you put your heart to. Unfortunately, it was your heart that was broken more than once. Do not let your heart become cold because of your experiences. This world is not easy, but remember, this is not our final resting place. It is merely a temporary home. Always keep your heart and eyes fixed on Christ, and that is where you will find purpose, passion, strength, peace, and love. Take care of Mom. She is going to need a lot of support over the next few months. I'm going to be waiting for you at the gates, and I will ask Jesus if I can check on you from time to time. I love you. John Jr., I'm leaving the family in good hands. You have a huge responsibility ahead of you to help Mom lead our family. I know you will be just fine. I have been reflecting on your life. I apologize that you were born to teenage parents. I will say you never lacked material items, but there was a void of having a home with two parents. None of this was your fault, and you never let it become a stumbling block or an excuse. You are my son, and I am well pleased with you. Now that you have your own family, ensure to give them your attention. Never assume everything is okay. Family and marriage take effort. In the military, we had a term, improve your fighting position. Once we had our fighting position dug in the ground and camouflage, we had to constantly improve it. Son, improve your fighting position often. Raise your son. Give him your time and attention. A wise pastor once told me, when you hunt and fish with your children, you will not have to hunt for them when they are older. Do not expect schools to do your job by raising your kids. Eat dinner with your family at the table and put the electronics away. Look your family in the eyes when you talk with them. It's important for your wife and your children to know they have your full attention. Most importantly, ensure your family has a relationship with Christ. I am proud of you and I love you, son. Mason. As you were growing up, and even now, I have tried to protect you from influences. Sadly, I was a chief influencer and I blamed you for the consequences. The truth is, I was maturing at the time you were exploring life. I am sorry. I wish I could take it all back and hit the reset button. I was never disappointed with you, only concerned. I wanted you to live up to the potential I knew was in you. I am thankful to God that I have been able to witness a true transformation in your life. You have become a good man and an outstanding provider and father. I told John Jr. to ensure to hunt and fish with his children. It's a metaphor that serves as a reminder to invest in your family. Do it better than I did. Things turned around for us eventually, but we struggled through needless turmoil for so long. When I was at my lowest point, God sent you to take care of me. Thank you for being my hero and catching me when I was falling through the cracks of life. You carried me where I could not take myself. Thank you, son. I am proud of you. You bring joy to my heart. Help John Jr. lead our family and have mom move with you. She needs to be around the girls. I love you. To my grandbabies, I'm sorry that I will not be here to witness the big events in your life. You will achieve so much. I know this to be true because you're God's children and my grandbabies. I'm so proud of you. Each of you has a special place in my heart. I want to impart wisdom unto you. This is something I wish my family would have taught me in life. It comes from the book of Joshua in the Bible. God told Joshua, this book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall read and meditate on it day and night, so that you may be careful to do everything in accordance with all that is written in it. For then you will make your way prosperous, and then you will be successful. Read and reread God's word, meditate on it, which means to think about what you have read. Impart this to your family, and as the scripture says, then you will be successful. In closing, this is not goodbye, only see you later. Love, John, Dad, and Grandpa. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord.
That's a beautiful letter. Take me through the mindset of giving your permission to remarry with your wife.
I love her so much. She wouldn't be able to go with me. So I would want her to have a full life, not one where she was isolated and just held on to me. So what I did is I released her to go out and to have that peace and hear it from me, not just assume, because if I didn't say those words, then she would maybe think, maybe I'm not supposed to find another companion. Well, the Bible says that we were built relationally. I go back to the whole suicide thing. One of the indicators of suicide is isolation. I don't want my wife isolated. I want her to have peace and joy and love. And in order to do that, you have to have healthy relationships. You have to have a companion. You're not meant to be alone. And so what I was doing in that moment was telling her, you have my permission to go be happy. That's really what I was saying to her. You have my permission to go be happy.
Why is this something we don't talk about? You always hear stories of, yeah, well, it's only been a year since my partner passed. I mean, now you're making me think about it. It's like, I want to tell my wife today, like, if something ever happens to me, I want you to be happy. It could be tomorrow. I don't care.
When you love someone, you want the best for them. My wife, although right now she's my companion, and if April 2nd, I wouldn't have got up off the ground, she would have only been 40 something years old. What happens to the rest of her life? In that, I think sometimes people can get stuck. They can get stuck. And so, as you said, well, why don't you hear this more? I think it's just one of those things that if you're not like a marriage counselor or something like that, it's probably not something you just go around hearing. But in the moment, for me, as I was penning this letter and thinking about what's on my heart, I was thinking about the future and what my kids would go through. And I just wanted to make sure that my wife knew that I loved her. And I wanted her happy. She could never replace me, right? Your wife could never replace you.
No, not at all.
Yeah,
no.
They could, but what they could do is they could start a new life and a new hope and a new joy and a new home. Just because there's loss, our lives ain't over. Just think about businesses. Hey, one CEO goes, does the business go? No, just the next person moves in and the business keeps going. You know, one day my boss told me, he said, John, if you leave our organization, we've been here for 50 years. It's going to keep going. So people need to understand that because there's loss, like if my wife were to lose me, life is going to continue. Either she's going to continue moving in the direction that life is going, or she's going to get stuck and everything and everyone around her will keep moving. And that's dangerous.
After talking with you, I'm okay with, like, you know, babe, the next person's going to come in and you're okay. You have my permission. If I even give permission, is that right? To make it better than it was when I was around.
You're not giving permission. You're just giving a blessing. You're just saying, I'm giving you a blessing. You have my blessing to go and to raise our kids and to do it right and to have joy and peace and to not be isolated. And that's really, I think, what it is. And you're right. You're leaving your wife with the best possible experience. Not, you know what, my husband was, and then every other 4-letter word that follows behind that. That's not what you want. The 4-letter word that you want is love. Love, man. This guy loved me so much that he's going to be waiting for me, but I still have a life here to live. And so that's a good thing. As we got to this letter, I talked about Mason's transformation.
I was just going to ask about Mason. You blamed yourself on the bad influences.
When I was getting out of the hospital, so after I was shot, I was at Darnall Army Hospital, and then they moved me to a level 1 trauma center in Temple, Texas. And then after a couple of days, the Army said, well, we got it from here. And they moved me to San Antonio Brooke Army Medical Center. And that's where I finished out my care. When I was getting out of the hospital, so a lot of people ask me all the time, John, how long were you in the hospital? Well, from April 2nd, I was shot, and I was released at the end of April and from Brooke Army Medical Center. And they told my wife, Angel, they said, Angel, we need a medical attendant. We need someone that's going to be able to provide care for John and be with him all the time. And she said, well, I'm in Killeen. Like, we have 4 dogs and 2 birds. I mean, man, when people get shot or trauma, tragedy happens, life, like I just said it earlier, life keeps going. How was my wife going to be in 2 places at once? So she said she prayed. She just felt that God put it in her heart to invite my son Mason to come care for me. Well, back then, Mason and I were like oil and water, because when he was growing up, I blamed him for getting in trouble. At the time, I hadn't had the revelation that I was an absent father. So in 2014, when my wife says, hey, I'm going to invite Mason to come be your caretaker, I was like, no way. I couldn't speak at the time, but I shook my head like my wife understood I was getting my point across. But who was I, Jeremy, to make decisions at that time for my wife? Who was I to make decisions? She needed help. And here I am in this bed. I just said, okay, have Mason come. And the military put Mason and I in a Fisher House little hotel room. It's kind of like the size of a little Motel 6, but they're on the Brooke Army Medical Center campus in a Fisher House. And it was there, Jeremy, in the midst of my brokenness, in the midst of food tubes in a trach, and I couldn't speak, and I just had tubes coming out of everywhere. And it was in the midst of my brokenness that my son was my caretaker, and he was so gentle with me, and he changed my wound dressings. And it was in the midst of my brokenness that I looked at my son and I told him that I was sorry. It took for me to be utterly broken, for me to look up and put my pride aside and put everything aside and to tell my son, I am so sorry. See, I was physically broken. I was emotionally broken. And so I believe that God, in that moment, he said, you know what, John, since everything's broken, we might as well just start fixing everything. You're utterly shattered right now. So what did he do? He started with my family. And he brought Mason, because that was the first relationship that needed to be restored. It was Mason and I. So Mason and I in this Fisher House hotel room is where God restored my son and I. It was in the midst of this, my lowest point in life. I couldn't go down any further, but what I could do was go up. And I looked up at my son and I said, Mason, I'm sorry.
What did Mason say? Did he know what you were talking about? Did he, when you said you were sorry, you looked at him and said, I'm sorry. Did he get it was for the years, or just like, I'm sorry for you having to take care of me?
He understood. I explained to him. I told him everything, like in that letter. I'm sorry that I blamed you. I'm sorry that I wasn't more of a father to you. You know, when you needed me most, when you were growing up, when you were playing baseball, I wasn't there. And I wasn't apologizing for being in the military and being on deployment. I was apologizing for when I was home and I was absent. And I asked for your forgiveness. And he said, Dad, I thank you. Thank you. And I forgive you. And he actually forgave me. And then I had to forgive the guy that shot me. That's how I'm here today.
I kind of like to know, when did you forgive the shooter? Right now, like, somebody shot me like that, or I'm angry.
April 2nd of 2014, there were 19 of us shot. 3 soldiers lost their lives. And then the shooter took his own life. So he actually became victim number 20. And he was the 4th person that died that day. So 3 died by his hands. And then he took his own life. You know, but I also believe he was a victim. I believe that he suffered from something. Something caused him to break. And I don't know if it's PTSD. I was told that he was trying to go on leave and there was an issue with his paperwork. And so he just snapped. I think his mother or grandmother had passed away and he was trying to go on leave and there was a bit of pushback. And so he just snapped and went after his chain of command and then just kept going. I often share this, that there wasn't just 20 victims that day. So 19 and then him being 20. There was 21. I believe the 21st victim was the family of Ivan Lopez. I think about his wife and his children, and I don't know much about his life. There was a news clip that I saw, and right away the media, right, they just want to jump on the scene, and there's cameras in his wife's face as she's rushing out of her apartment with her face being covered. But what was life like for her? You know, you just read my last letter, and I'm trying to give hope and speak encouragement, but what happened the night before? What if we could read Ivan Lopez's last letter? What would that say? Did he hug his children the night before when he walked out? Did he take his kids to school that day and say, Daddy loves you, and never walk back in the house? And I believe the family of Ivan Lopez is victim 21 from the April 2nd, 2014 shooting. I can't speak for the other victims, but I can only speak for me. And this is what I feel in my heart. And then how did I forgive him?
Yeah, were you angry after?
Here's what the military did. I was wounded on a military base by a broken soldier. They put me on base in a formation of broken soldiers. So they put me in a warrior transition unit on Fort Sam. And I remember initially people would walk past me and I would cringe because I would think that people were going to shoot me. When cars would pass me, I would cringe. And that's where I had anger towards him. I mean, if you're shot at a mass shooting, you're going to see every shrink, every head doctor that the military has. And I went through them. I want to go back to God because it was in a conversation that I had with God that I forgave him. See, my counselors were helping me, but this was something that had to be done within me that I had to make a decision to do. In a conversation with God, it went like this. You can hang on to that bitterness. That's what it is. Unforgiveness is bitterness that you're going to hang on to, and it's going to become cancer in your body, and it can kill you from within. Or you can give it to me. Just imagine your fist balled up, and you're holding on to this anger, this bitterness from someone wounding you. Again, what did I say earlier? How many of you been wounded by people you've trusted? Jeremy, I would have given. We would have, right? We would have given our lives for our service members, our brothers and sisters, right? We would have 100%. Given our lives. In any different circumstance, I would have, if we were in Afghanistan, Iraq, or anywhere else, I would have given my life for this guy. So here he was trying to take mine though. So God said, John, you got your fist balled up. That's unforgiveness, is bitterness. But if you give it to me, then you can start healing. And I said, God, but don't you remember this guy tried to take my life? How could you ask me to forgive him? And he said, okay, if you don't, then you're going to hang on to it because we both can't. And I said, okay, God, here you go. And when I opened my hand, PTSD, depression, anger, fear, suicide just went. And it wasn't automatically, but I released the burden to God and he took it. And then I was able to heal. So when you forgive someone, you can start healing. See these scars on my neck? See, they're not bleeding anymore. See, a scar is evidence that you were wounded, but it's also evidence that you healed.
I like that. My mom says scars add character.
You know, the doctor said, John, we could take these scars off. We have all the plastic surgery. I mean, if looking at the scars would cause more trauma, we could take them off. I said, no. I need to remember them. I need to see them because I need to be reminded of what God did for me. Now my purpose is to share hope and to share healing and to tell people to get up. You know, there were times, Jeremy, after I was shot that I would see progress rapidly, and then sometimes it would take months. But you know what I did? I just kept going off my last command, get up. All I did was get up that day to face those challenges, and sometimes they were harder. Sometimes I look back and I'm like, man, it was easier to stay on the ground, but I just kept getting up. And I faced the challenges that day and things just began to get better. I ended up becoming an aide to a 2-star general after I was shot. Only the use of one arm. So I don't have the use of my right arm. And I'm saying that because some of the best things that happened in my career were after I was shot. And And that happened because I made the decision to get up.
Can't thank you enough for sharing your story with us and getting up, but also teaching us that the scars we see on other people show that people are hurting, but it's also a sign of healing.
That's right. Thanks, Jeremy, for having me.
Can't thank you enough.